What's going on, Bridging the Gap family? This is Roger.
And Cheryl.
And we are going to do a video today that we had not planned on doing. In our last video, we kind of mentioned there's a bunch of stuff we haven't had a chance to get to you. We are pushing all that aside to do this video first because it's just that important. After our last video, Cheryl came across the information that we're going to share with you today. I looked at it, it looked familiar when she shared it with me. That's because a buddy of mine sent me the same video on January 2nd, and I hadn't had a chance to look at it until today. This video is important enough. Like I said, we're going to push some other things aside, and we're going to do something you've never heard us ask you to do, and that is we're going to ask every one of you who sees this video to share it. And I mean share it widely with every single person you know in the diaspora. The information here is absolutely critical. We have to understand the importance of the continent and the timing that we're in now. So we're gonna share with you a couple of videos. We're not just gonna let the videos play. We're gonna walk you through this information from a gentleman. You wanna share his information?
Yes, so this video is from Professor Jagdish Sheth. And I'll just read this little part just to let you know why he's worth listening to. Says he is a renowned scholar and internationally recognized thought leader. He has published more than 300 research papers and more than 30 books on various disciplines and topics. His insights on global competition, strategic thinking, geopolitics, and emerging markets are considered revolutionary.
What's that last part? His insights on global competition, strategic thinking, geopolitics, okay, emerging markets are considered revolutionary. When you listen to this video, you have to put your thinking cap on. What's next for the world? What's the next big thing? That's what this dude is known for, right? And we've been talking about some of these things, and we get some pushback every now and then from folks who don't understand that thought process, which is why we're asking you to share this. We as Black people gotta know the significance of the continent and the timing that we're in, and we gotta catch up with those who already know.
Right, and one of the books that he wrote, I think he said he wrote it in 2007 or 8, maybe. But if you think about when he wrote the book and where we are now today, you'll see why he's worth listening to, because he was on point.
And he is a professor, I don't think that mentioned, he's a professor at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. So we're gonna play his clip. We're gonna pause it periodically to talk about some things. Then we're gonna shift to the second clip that he did in 2018. And the solutions for the continent of Africa blew us away because he had listed 10 of them and we've talked about 9. In detail.
Without knowing any of this, without ever hearing about him.
Right, didn't know anything, just seeing the things that need to be dealt with here on the continent. Some of the things he titled, we don't need, I was like, what does that mean? Once he starts explaining what it means, we're like, oh, okay, we're talking about that. We just didn't label it what he labeled it. It is critical that we understand the solutions to the problems, and he lays those out crystal clear. So
and why it's important, not just to people on the continent, but also to the diaspora.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, some of us believe like, you know, we should just focus on our country where we were born, for us in America. Why would we want to focus on the continent? And this helps bring some clarity to that. And
that's some of the pushback
we didn't know any of this stuff though. This is all divine for us.
Yeah, this is all just dropped in our lap. It's like, my gosh, we've been discussing these very things and are addressing these things with the projects that we're working on right now. But some of the pushback I mentioned, what Cheryl's talking about. So I'm just gonna say this. A lot of the ADOS community, folks are like, we need to build it home. Our ancestors built America and we need to fight for what's right here.
ADOS meaning
American descendants of slaves. And I'm not mad at that mindset because it's the truth. Our ancestors built this country. This country would be nothing without us. And we deserve that. Question is, do they have it to give? Right? And when you see this video and some of the information we're going to share with you today, I hope you start to question your own thought processes on that. because it's bigger than where we were born and what we deserve here. This is a global context. It's a global situation we got to look at and how to be a part of the solution. And you got to go where the resources are to pull that off. And it's not America.
Right.
So
and we have to respect that. Everybody's not going to get that.
no.
Everybody's not going to want to even take this information and put the value on it that we put on it.
Right.
But respect those who have this mindset as well.
Two things. One, respect it. If you don't agree with us, that's fine, but don't try to push us off the edge of the cliff. We're not turning back. Number one, just respect it and keep it pushing. Number two, don't say we didn't tell you.
Right.
Because at the end of this thing, you have an opportunity right now to get engaged in Google or Microsoft at its inception for the most part. Don't say we didn't tell you. The goal here is to educate and to make sure we as the diaspora are informed so that we can take actions that will benefit us.
And stop being left behind.
And stop being left
begging
behind.
for them to do something for us
That
when we can do it for ourselves.
That they're never going to do in the first place.
Yeah.
So, one, we can agree to disagree, but don't say we didn't tell you.
Right.
Because that's what this video is for, which is why we're asking you to do something we've never asked. Share this video, and I mean share it everywhere. Let's start. Folks, the reason we're asking you to share this video because it is absolutely about an awakening. You see on the screen, it says, the African awakening, will the giant wake up? The giant is the continent. So I want you to hear what this guy is saying. We're going to break it down as we go through, and we have to wake up and engage.
Welcome. I'm Professor Jagdish Sheth at Emory University. This presentation is all about rise of Africa. I believe Africa as a sleeping giant will surprise all of us in the second half of this century, 21st century, as China surprised all of us in the first half of the 21st century. Nobody imagined the rise of China, let's say in late 1900s, 1990s, and all of a sudden we find China has become the second largest economy, followed now very quickly under purchasing power parity by India.
Real quick, I'm going to touch on this. What he's talking about, the rise of China, came from the China diaspora. And the current president of Ghana just did a video talking about how China's rise came from those in the diaspora coming back, pouring in, and he's going to cover some of that. But that is the conversation that is taking place in Ghana as we speak. But it's not just Ghana, it is the continent as a whole. If we are going to rise the way China rose, it is going to take all of us to pull it off. Listen to what this guy's saying.
And people are as surprised about the rise of India. I think we'll have the same kind of a surprise, passion, enthusiasm about the rise of Africa in the second half of the 21st century. The title of the presentation is called The African Awakening. Will the giant wake up? In fact, actually the question should be, who will wake up the giant? So let's look at the economic trends. And if you look at the historical perspective about economic growth engines for world growth, we have always labeled 1800s as the European century because European colonial powers, through global expansion, created a huge economic growth and modernized many parts of the world. European century was displaced in 1900s by what is called the American century, where America became the largest market, largest sourcing destination, largest everything, and became a major economic growth engine for the world. And of course, in the 21st century, this century, the first half, it's all about Asian century, as it is called, primarily led by China. Japan, of course, is there. And of course, India, the ASEAN nations, the Southeast Asia, South Korea, etc. So it's called the Asian century. My view is that the Asian century will last only about half a century. Primarily because China will age much faster than we all anticipated and will have an aging population very similar to Japan aging. And that's going to basically happen by 2040, 2050.
I want to pause right there as he's talking about these nations aging. At the end of this video, we're not going to share it, but we're going to put a clip to another video that talks about specifically what he is discussing, and that is population, what it takes for a nation of people, an ethnicity to continue to have the ability to grow and thrive. He talks about aging nations, and he's just talking about Asia and India, but this next video that we're going to attach to the end of this thing when we send this out is about a 30-minute video that tells you specifically why they are so panicked. They know that they are literally not in position to continue. Okay, so it's not just Asia, it's not just India. This whole racial thing, the reason that it is intensifying right now is this aging issue, what he's discussing right now.
China will become more advanced economy, will shift toward more services, etc. So the next frontier is something else or somebody else, and that is likely to be the continent of Africa, not a single nation of Africa. So the second half of the 21st century will be the African century. Why the rise of Africa is inevitable.
All right. Guys, hear what he's saying from this point forward. We're talking about the second half of the century. We're not even a quarter way through yet. When we talk about the infancy stage of awakening an absolute giant, you're on the forefront of that if you choose to engage. But we said before, don't listen so much to what they say, watch what they do. Listen to this dude tell you about what they're doing. His words match the actions. He's detailing the actions and he's detailing what's coming, and we need to be a part of it early on, not late to the party.
And there are 4 reasons, at least that I can articulate. The first reason is that there's a growth of the brand conscious middle class all over Africa, both sub-Saharan Africa and the whole continent of Africa. Africa is modernizing much faster than we realized, not just in urban cities as one would expect, but also into second tier and even rural markets. As we all travel to Africa, we are actually astounded how much people are shifting from branded, non-branded consumption, the street vendor kind of a consumption, to more and more branded consumption. And therefore the consumer economy will get more and more commercialized and will be a growth engine for Africa. It is the largest resource continent in the world by a magnitude compared to America, for example, compared to China, compared to India, Australia, any large landmass, there's nothing like Africa.
Nothing like it.
I think that's going to give it a competitive advantage, a resource-based advantage. Surprisingly, Africa has a very large amount and a percentage of what I call entrepreneurial DNA. Entrepreneurship is universal. It does not recognize literacy. Most illiterate people are more entrepreneurial sometimes than literate people. It does not recognize faith. Every faith has entrepreneurs. It does not recognize gender. Women are as good entrepreneurs as men. And it does not recognize age. Young people can be entrepreneurs, older people can be entrepreneurs. So how do you unlike this entrepreneurship? And how will that happen? And how do you unlock the human potential through entrepreneurship, not just through education? I think will be one more thing we'll be talking about. And of course, Africa is transitioning from the traditional agrarian economy to more and more industrial economy. The transition of the African economy from agriculture, industrial raw material based economy to more and more value-added manufactured-based economy will be also enabled by outsiders, especially world agencies like the United Nations, UNIDO, for example, UNESCO, for example, WHO, for example. All of them will try to modernize Africa to bring them into the 21st century. So here are.
Did you hear what he said? The organizations, the international organizations will try to modernize. They will try, not Africa will try to modernize itself. These outside forces will try to modernize. They're not doing that without trying to keep all of the resources, all of the capital from that modernization for themselves.
The four main reasons, as I discussed. And here are some numbers to show that this seems like the trend. The total GDP of 54 nations all over Africa is about $6 trillion based on purchasing power parity, which I think is a better measure in general, which is the buying power as opposed to conversion into the dollar economy at the exchange rates. 6 trillion is not a small economy.
No, sir.
The sub-Saharan nations themselves also are by themselves at least $4 trillion based on purchasing power parity. The average annual growth in 2017 to 15 as an average is 4.6% and increasing. Of course, there's a lot of variation between nations within Africa. Some are growing at about 10, 11%. Others are actually stagnant or negative growth even. But average is more fascinating to watch. Average as a whole subcontinent or sub-Sahara continent is 4.6%, which is not small given that the world is desperately struggling for economic growth, especially among advanced economies. And the growth of China begins to slow down with the aging of its population and it becomes a mature economy. I was very surprised to also find that the total population of Africa as a continent now exceeds 1 billion people. If you look at the rise of America, the rise of China, the rise of India, they're all primarily based upon consumer economy, where numbers matter. So a billion population all aspiring to become brand conscious, middle class consumers creates a huge economic spark. And as we know, the US economy, Chinese economy, and to some extent Indian economy, the largest sector is the consumer economy as opposed to industrial economy or military. And the GDP per capita as measured in purchasing power parity is actually not shabby. It is $4,870, which says that while they do have the base of the pyramid, which means $2 per day income population, $700, actually in a purchasing power parity, it is much bigger buying power, and the average surprisingly is 4,870, which again is a huge range between nations within Africa. Punchline, Africa has the size, but not the scale. Partly because the continent is divided by countries. Each country has their own policy and the agenda. Each country has different leadership. Each country has different external influences, however you analyze it. So if there was some way one can take the size of the continent and make it into a scale-oriented.
Let's touch on that real quick. What he's saying is all of these numbers are is Europe does with the Eurozone. But we don't operate that way on the continent because of all these divisions and all these borders that were put there by Europeans. They knew then that if this economy was one large, massive economy, there's nothing they can do to compete.
Or control.
Or control. But there's an initiative, R400 is the initiative, right? They're about to open up a free trade zone in Africa that is going to be worth $3.4 trillion annually. free borders, free trade amongst the continent and internationally. Things are about to change on this continent. And this is what he's addressing. And he's going to tell you how the paradigm shift is moving. And he's really going to tell you what they're planning for the future, kind of like the Berlin Conference of the past.
Economy or a continent will have a huge, huge world economic growth, but it'll take several decades to engage or get it done. So if you like the new measures of world economy, which is the purchasing power parity, you find that China is already $20 trillion, not in GDP, but in PPP. US is now second at $18 trillion, and US will lag behind as China grows much faster. For example, 2% or 2.5% growth in America versus 6%. India is at $8 trillion today based upon World Bank data, but it is again with demonetization policy of the government, the cash economy becoming more and more actually a non-cash economy, leapfrogging from the computer revolution or a PC revolution to a cell phone revolution, growth of the e-commerce and everything you look at it, it is interesting to see India is growing faster even than China, and of course much faster than all advanced economies, so the gap will rise. In fact, some reports have articulated, especially by PwC, that it is very possible if you extrapolate the current growth trends and modernization that's taking place, that India will actually become.
I want to pause this real quick because Africa is not on this list, but I want you to think back to what he just said. The GDP by Purchasing Power Index or PPP, whatever he called it, the continent of Africa is $6 trillion. Just the sub-Saharan African nations is $4 trillion. That puts them currently number 4 on this list. And it's not developed yet. As he said, the giant has not been awakened yet. Already number 4 on this list.
The largest single economy on purchasing power parity, China will be the second largest, and America will be the third economy. The rest of the nations will get more and more marginalized on purchasing power parity as a measure. I wrote a book called India Rising. The first edition was in 2008, where I felt very strongly that the rise of China and India will make a difference on world economy, but definitely on world geopolitics. And it is happening. I updated the book about 2015 or so, and my revision basically came to a conclusion that what was forecasted in 2007-8 has happened or is happening sooner than I expected. The only issue with China and India, as will be with Africa, as I will articulate, is not the technology anymore. It is not capital, surprisingly, which are the old industrial models of creating economic growth, but surprisingly, it will be the environment. Environment will be the showstopper. It'll shut itself down. If too much extraction we do, too much exploitation we do, without replanting the natural resources, which one can do if they're vegetation-based, such as tree planting, deforestations could be done, but if they are industrial resources, we don't know how to replant it. Might be better to actually do more conservation-based exploration, extraction, etc., which is a key issue Africa will face as a matter of time, because it is the largest source of natural resources in the world. But this book articulated, India Rising, that compared to the old triad power, will emerge a new triad power, which led for me to start a new policy institute, the new triad power, It's called India, China, America Institute. And I will talk about that later on, about how that will have a huge influence on the future of Africa. So let's look at the old triad power. As of 1987, which is not that far in the past, 45% of the world trade was only among 15 nations, the 12 common market European nations, such as Germany, such as France, United Kingdom, Netherlands, Italy, etc. And the two North American nations, America and Canada, and Japan as a late entrant after World War II. These 15 nations engaged in trade 45% among themselves. 55%, of course, was mostly with their ex-colonies, the Commonwealth nations, for example, but they were mostly to get raw materials from them to do value add in their own markets. And therefore, when you look at the GDP concentration, 70% of the world GDP was all within these 15 countries. 70%. The rest of the world didn't matter, no matter what was their population size. This 15 nation is aging and aging very rapidly. It is desperately looking for growth domestically and can't do it. And if you don't create growth domestically, in the process create employment and wealth.
I want to point this out. Again, he's talking about aging. He's saying these 15 countries that basically held 70% of the world's GDP amongst themselves, they're aging and aging rapidly. And the second thing he said was they basically sought raw materials so they could create value add products. Keep that in mind. In their own land. They sought materials elsewhere to bring to their land so they could create the value add products. We're going to tie all this into the continent, so you guys have to see how critical the continent of Africa is going to be. They're aging and they don't have resources.
And also, just to clarify, what value add products? So
manufactured products, right, not raw materials.
Not raw materials. So in our last video, we talked about the neem trees, we talked about the cacao. Those are the raw products.
Right.
And so versus just taking that raw cacao and selling it, they're talking about, they're taking that raw cacao and taking it to their land and producing it and manufacturing it and making products that are sellable and marketable.
Value add.
That's the value add.
Right.
Versus nobody is going to just buy necessarily the cacao on the market.
Right.
The average consumer.
Right.
So you have to package.
They want the cocoa packets.
Right.
They want the chocolate bars.
Right.
That's the value add.
Right.
Take the resource, create the value added product, and people pay handsomely.
Way more
for that value add than they paid for the resources.
Yeah.
This is what they were doing then, is they were seeking resources from other places to bring things to their homeland, create the value add products, and they control 70% of the economy, the global economy. Well, every one of those nations is aging rapidly, as he just mentioned. Keep all of that in mind.
For the ordinary people, if the ordinary people are out of job, the politicians are out of job, as we have seen enormous anti-incumbency in all these advanced economies. They want some fresh blood to say, save our wallets and save our jobs. This is leading to a shift in world economy into what I call the new triad power, based upon the World Bank numbers measured on purchasing power parity, which is the buying power of the nation, not the exchange rate and the speculation in the exchange rates. United States will still continue to be the dominant power for some time, although not number one position, but it'll be definitely among the top three. And there's a distant gap after three, for example. But the second nation is China, and the third one is India. Unlike the previous triad power that I showed you, Japan, Europe, Western Europe, and America, there was a harmony of relationship. Same viewpoint, because America defeated Japan and Germany and came out with a world order in terms of world institutions, like, for example, the IMF and the World Bank, with the Bretton Woods Conference, as it is called, the United Nations as another agency that was created, agencies within United Nations in terms of a global architecture. America had the wealth to invest into Japan and reconstruct Japan, the Marshall Plan for Germany, for example, and continued the journey as in the last century, which is why it's called the American century in many ways. But this harmony and a common view that capitalism is the foundation, democracy is the way to really have a governance. This is leading to a shift in world economy into what I call the new triad power, based upon the World Bank numbers measured on purchasing power parity, which is the buying power of the nation, not the exchange rate and the speculation in the exchange rates. United States will still continue to be the dominant power for some time, although not number one position, but it'll be definitely among the top three. And there's a distant gap after three, for example. But the second nation is China, and the third one is India. Unlike the previous triad power that I showed you, Japan, Europe, Western Europe, and America, there was a harmony of relationship, same viewpoint, because America defeated Japan and Germany and came out with a world order in terms of world institutions, like, for example, the IMF and the World Bank, with the Bretton Woods Conference, as it is called, the United Nations as another agency that was created, agencies within United Nations in terms of a global architecture. America had the wealth to invest into Japan and reconstruct Japan, the Marshall Plan for Germany, for example, and continued the journey as in the last century, which is why it's called the American century in many ways. But this harmony and a common view that capitalism is the foundation, democracy is the way to really have a governance mechanism, having a common enemy in Cold War called the Soviet Union, this is not the reality anymore. The new triad power comes from very different perspectives. China has a communist legacy, as it is becoming more and more capitalistic through economic reforms and policy changes. India was organized as a socialistic pattern of society, more of a Leninist thinking. There are certain commanding height industries that you never allow private sector because they will exploit it. Mistrust of capitalism. Government should be as much in social programs as it should be in economic aspects by and large. That is changing since the 1991 reforms in India, economic reforms, but it still has the DNA of not trusting capitalism in its pure form. And you have America, which is the other extreme of raw capitalism, or what I call cowboy capitalism. Trust everything to capitalism till market fails. Like the great economic recession of 2007 and 8, or in certain industries, the fight for standards, for example, in the cellular industry, where you begin to say, let the government come out with a policy and a dictate, as we did with anti-smoking, for example, market was failing, as there are many industries, but it basically says, give the benefit of doubt to the capitalist first before the government intervenes through policy changes. Three different ideologies.
I want to pause this right here. The new triad of power, the United States, China, and India. And what he's saying is this is going to be different than the old triad because all of those triad powers in the old triad had the similar philosophy of capitalism. China's communist, India's socialist, United States is capitalistic. But look in the middle of this, it says strategic repositioning of Africa is ultimately what these three triad powers are going to pull off, or what they want to pull off, because they don't have the resources and their societies are aging out. So they're going to be on the continent strategically repositioning Africa.
But it becomes Africa becomes strategic to the new triad power for its resources, markets, and geopolitics.
Exactly.
So what does that mean?
For its resources, for its markets, and the geopolitics. So all of the things that are important, the leaders of the African countries, a lot of them are put in place by Western powers. A lot of the coups that you've seen in Africa is because leaders won't comply with Western power. So the politics behind everything that takes place on the continent, the markets that he's talking about, creating value adds versus just giving away raw products, and the raw products themselves, the resources in the ground on the continent, all of these things will reshape the new economy. And these three powers are try to be strategic in how they strip those resources, how they manipulate the resources, the markets, and the geopolitics to their advantage, though they all have three different ideologies, is what he's saying. That cleared up.
Not only that, each one has their own economic advisors, security advisors, and surprisingly, they have long memories. There are people in the Indian advisory policy making, crowd in some fashion, who still remember all the way, in fact, to non-alignment policy. So is true in America. Only nation that has gone forward, forgetting the legacy of communism and all the history behind, seems to be China. China is emerging more pragmatic and changing the economic advisors accordingly and the policy advisors. But new triad power is real, except this new triad power, creating a harmony among them, is going to be a challenging task. Out of this new triad power, you see a strategic repositioning of Africa. Africa should have been invested over 200 years in a positive way, as opposed to a colonial approach by the Europeans from 1800s, as the Europeans did in America. But they kept Africa more like a colony, more extracting its raw materials. So Africa never transitioned properly from the agriculture-based economy or industrial raw material economy to actually an industrialized nation. I think Africa will be awakened by, the giant will be awakened by the new triad power. And that means it'll be a race for resources by these three nations, America, China, and India. Both soft power and hard power will be utilized by all three nations, surprisingly. And all these three nations will begin to shift its focus away from their own historical alignments toward more and more Africa.
Let's pause right there. The three things he's talking about is resources. He said it's going to be a strategic race amongst them for the resources. The second thing he said was, I just lost my train of thought, doggone it. Power, the soft power and hard power, what they're going to use. They're going to negotiate their way. Like right now, China's all over the continent of Africa. That's soft power. If they don't get what they need in negotiations, they are going to have issues like trying to raise up coups and other things so that they can battle for those resources. This is not the Berlin Conference. So the Berlin Conference was Germany and the Portuguese and the British coming together saying, we don't want to fight each other over these resources. So we're going to parcel out these lands, because they were the same mindset. And they wanted to make sure they each got what they needed without having to have competition. You remember Rockefeller said, competition is a sin. That's their mindset coming in, which led to the initial triad. Well, those triads were all capitalistic. So they had a similar mindset. They weren't going to be battling with each other over the continent and over the global economy. Well, these three parties, their ideologies are diametrically opposed to one another. So they're going to have, it's going to be a race for resources, soft power and hard power, meaning they're going to force the issue where they have to because they don't have any resources left. When he said earlier about replanting, replenishing, they didn't do all that. They used up all the resources they had. They used up all the resources from the continent. They've been a consumer mentality all along, not thinking about replenishing. Now they don't have any resources, which is why this giant of Africa will be the end all be all. There's enough arable land in Africa to feed the entire planet right now. And what they're planning on doing is battling for those resources and stripping the continent of those resources like they've done their own lands. We got to get ahead of that. We can't have people who are just in it for power and authority
And not caring about the people.
and not caring about the people, coming in here battling for resources
That don't belong to them.
that don't belong to them.
Like, how you coming in and fighting over something that don't even belong to you?
But the
That's
key,
what upsets me.
well, here it's history repeats itself. We don't, and until we learn from history, we circle the same mountain over and over again. We've seen this play out before. It played out at the Berlin Conference. This is the new Berlin Conference.
New version.
And we got to understand what it is, and that they're going to try to do the same thing they did then now, just with different strategies, repositioning Africa. And they're not going to be in agreement. So they're going to be three different strategies on that repositioning. They're all diametrically opposed to each other, none of which are here to build the continent or the people of the continent, which is why this timing is absolutely critical for the giant, which is the continent of Africa and the diaspora, to wake up.
And come together.
Because we can stop all of this.
Yeah.
I promise you we can and will stop all of this if we come together. If we remain asleep and allowing people who don't care about the continent to rape and pillage the resources of the continent, we don't have anybody to blame but ourselves. No one to blame but ourselves.
But here's the other thing, because I think some people in the diaspora are comfortable, just say for America, okay? We're comfortable for so long. Now he's saying America's still going to be the top three. I'm not convinced of that part. He didn't know about Trump. He didn't know we're going to have a Trump coming through tearing stuff up. But I think as a African American in the diaspora, we can't be too comfortable thinking that America is going to always be how it's been, because it hasn't been that great for us anyway. But the things that we enjoy, the freedoms that we enjoy, and how we have a lot of things that we can access, it doesn't mean it's always going to be that way.
It's not always going to be that way. History repeats itself. Cycles come and cycles go. There's no world hegemon that is still in power today. The Roman Empire, Alexander the Great, Nebuchadnezzar and his king, nothing is forever. So the fact that things are very turbulent there now, and I'm just going to share this with you so you can get your mind around where America is. I want you to Google HR 5404. That's House of Representatives Bill 5404. It was introduced almost 2 years ago, March of 2018, in Congress. And this is Congress saying we have to go back to backing our currency with gold, because the dollar has lost 96% of its purchasing power. What does that mean? If a dollar is worth 100 pennies and it loses 96%, that means your dollars that you're carrying around in your wallet and your purse right now are worth 4 cents. And they know it. And it's been 2 years since they introduced this bill. They haven't done anything about it. Here's what I can tell you. The dollar goes, the country goes. It is 4 cents away from its intrinsic value of zero. And that's your government. That's not Roger saying that. Look the bill up, HR 5404. We got to get out of this mindset that America's always been and always will be what it is. There are plenty of signs, and that bill is just one of many signs to say it's not likely to continue. And then when you listen to what people are telling you, they're aging out and they don't have the resources. You can't survive without resources unless you rape and pillage somebody else's, which is what we're trying to stop.
They don't have the natural resources or the people resources.
Exactly. That's what the aging out piece is. And the video clip that we're going to share at the end of this for you guys to watch on your own time will detail exactly what we're talking about. This is why this man is talking about them aging out. They don't have the natural resources nor the human resources to sustain themselves. The continent will be the end all be all for everybody.
Yeah. And once they're dying out, that's another video.
Yeah, so we don't have time to go there.
Okay.
We've already seen Chinese investment in Africa to a level that is unprecedented.
Unprecedented.
No European economy has ever done that kind of a magnitude of investment. And so also has not America last century. But now America as a competitor to China, or China emerging as a major rival, both economically, militarily, and maybe even politically, it's interesting. Everybody will focus on Africa. So to conclude this, rise of Africa is inevitable and has the potential to become the growth engine for the world, including growth for China, which domestic growth will slow down. They will find some other place. India down the road, same thing, definitely by 2050, if it continues its journey, and America now. This will lead to Africa's geopolitical.
The next video we're going to share with you is the same gentleman talking about what Africa needs to do, not what the triad is going to try to do, but what Africa needs to do for itself. And it's crazy because as we watch this video today, this guy outlines 10 different things that needs to be done. And we've actually had discussions on 9 of them. Not knowing that, you know, we were in line with this vision that this guy has and how important it is, just things that we've recognized and observed in our 3 trips here and some of the projects that we're working on. 9 out of the 10 things this guy lists are things that we've discussed. And we're going to walk you through these bullet points. And as he's explaining them, we're going to put them in proper context here in Ghana and the things that we've seen and heard and that need to be done. They have to be done. And I'm sure these problems are similar in other African countries, but, you know, we've recognized all of this stuff right here on the continent, all except for one.
Yeah. And so this other video he did in 2018.
This is newer.
Yeah. So the first one was 2015. This is about 3 years later.
Okay, guys, we're going to pick up this video where he starts talking about the recipe for the African awakening. And he's going to walk us through these 10 bullet points and these arrows that are pointing towards Africa. So as he's explaining them, we'll chime in throughout.
And I like what he has on here. Africans must lead Africa. That's the bottom line.
Y'all hear that?
I don't think I saw that the first time.
I didn't see it either.
But that's
Africans must lead Africa. 3 years ago, he's talking about this triad, and he's explaining to you how they're going to come for the resources. 3 years later, he is now telling us this must be African-led. And that doesn't mean just the Africans on the continent either. He will explain that.
Ingredients for which one needs a recipe, and I will go in each one of them in a somewhat detailed manner. The first major recommendation is that Africa needs to pivot toward Asia, especially Japan, which already is significantly present in Africa.
Of the 10 things he listed on here, this is the first one. This is the one we have not discussed and had not thought about in any way, shape, or form. I'm not even sure that we fully agree with it, but got to keep perspective on who's delivering this. It's a brother from India. It says Japan, China, and India is where Africa needs to pivot to. So,
I don't even know what he means by pivot to. Like do what they did?
but he's going to explain it, and then we'll talk about it.
Especially in the automobile sector, for example. China and India are the other 2. And all of them have heavily invested in Africa. And they're investing more and more. The soft power, as well as the hard power, they are enormously present, mostly from Asia. And that's what we need to watch. So pivoting Africa away from Europe, away from America toward Asia would be very key strategic policy decision.
Okay, so what he's basically saying is allow China, Japan, and India to come in here and take resources.
Instead of
Europe, instead of America, and that, to some degree, I would agree with them. They don't have that same colonization mindset, but they still have a resource mindset, and it is about taking
resource and not care about the people.
Right. It's not what they're trying to do. None of the triad, the old triad or the current or new triad, none of them are here for the people. They're here for the resources. All he's saying is we need to turn towards Asia and India to allow them to take the resources because they're less brutal. Not going to happen, Captain.
Second, invest in digital Africa. This is very doable. You will have to, first of all, computerize all government bureaucracies. And the cost of computing has become so cheap today, especially in a cloud environment or personal computer environment, compared to what it used to be, let's say, even 25, 30 years ago. The old computer legacy systems were very expensive, heavy capital expenditure, heavy maintenance expenditure. There is no such need anymore. Everything is cloud. Everything is basically variable cost, pay as you go kind of a notion. And it is already shown that one can actually create digital Africa, such as in Kenya. M-Pesa is one of those great payment systems that has gone beyond credit cards, the credit system, for example, and as much as 30% of the GDP does business on M-Pesa, which is an online payment system. And of course, now we see the rise of something like blockchain, which is about to come. And I think emerging economies will be the pioneers in using new technologies because you don't have the barriers of existing installed capital.
Okay, so let's talk about what he's talking about. He's talking about digital.
Digital?
Yeah, digitalizing. Anyway, making government digitized. That's the word I'm looking for. Making government digital and talking about currency. So, Jack from Jack from Twitter, in that poster we shared with you guys, he said Africa is going to be the leader in this coming decade. He says, I know it's going to be the leader in the crypto space. Well, I don't know if I know a statistic on this. I'll say a lot. A whole bunch of Africans don't have any sort of banking. They don't have a debit card. They don't have a credit card. So this digital space gentleman is talking about is something that the dude that created Twitter is talking about. And there's a solution that I'm familiar with that we just haven't had time to really dive into that we will be bringing to the table because it is something that has to be done with that many people being the third or fourth highest GDP per capita. People got to have a way to transact business. So this is going to be critical. And you need to hear what folks are saying. Jack said the exact same thing this dude is saying. It's going to be critical, and it's going to be big on the continent.
In the traditional legacy systems. Third key recommendation is that make in Africa. Africa used to exporting raw materials, whether those are industrial raw materials, agricultural raw materials, or animal raw materials. What it has to do is to do more value add in those areas, in agricultural and industrial sectors, and ship out value added products. It needs export markets. Asia is a great export market. And countries like China and Asia are finding that they do not have any more labor advantage. In fact, not only that, but given the resources and all those things, they're even better off basically shifting their manufacturing to Africa. Just as China was made by American and European corporations who went there to do value add because of the low labor cost as well as relaxed labor compliance laws. And therefore China came out not from Chinese brands as we think, which is only more recent now, but basically doing work for foreign brands. Africa has that opportunity, but Africa can also aspire to create their own multinational corporations, as some South African corporations have already done. Some of the African banks can do it. It's very possible, but the beginning journey would be to have foreign countries, advanced countries, especially from Asia, come and manufacture their products using raw material advantage, using labor advantage.
All right, I can't take no more. I got to speak to this. So, man, there's so much to unpack there. He's saying, one, we gotta make things in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
The resources are here. Raw materials are all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
We have to make products in Africa and send finished product to people.
Right. Just like you buy stuff and it says made in China,
Made in Japan.
it needs to say made in
Africa. We need to produce something.
Yes. Not just raw materials, not giving the raw materials for them to put their stamp on it.
And make the value-added product that
Right.
costs more.
Right.
The second thing he talked about was Africa being similar to India and Asia for low-cost labor. If you think of India and Asia, you think of sweatshops. Don't think that they're not going to try to pull that off on the continent. They are going to try to use the continent the way that America used Asia for a nickel an hour wage labor to get their products as cheap as possible, make as much money as possible. They are going to try to do the same thing on the continent, and that can't happen. And the last thing this dude said, the reason I paused when I did, he's basically saying we need to turn to Asia and allow them to do their manufacturing here.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't have stuff to manufacture.
Right.
This is what I was saying. He's basically saying, let us do the raping and pillaging that America and Britain and the European nation, let us do that, pivot toward us. Why does Africa, the continent of Africa, need China to manufacture their stuff here? Need India to manufacture their stuff here? It's not necessary. We have the resources. We need to do the manufacturing. We need to present the value add, not like they did, not making things for other countries.
There's too much talent.
Too much.
Too much talent.
Too much talent, too much. There's too much natural resources
Yeah.
and human resources
Yeah.
on this continent to say, oh, we're going to make things that for China and then put made in Africa on it. Bump all that.
Yeah.
We don't need them
No,
for
they
that.
want them to make it and still say made in China.
No, that's not how they did it. They started out by making things for companies in America.
Yeah.
And it just said made in China, but they're making them for American companies.
Yeah.
Whether it says made in China or bottom line, we don't need them to make anything here.
Right.
Everything that needs to be made comes from here,
The resources and the people to do the making.
are here.
Yes.
1 billion of them. If you remember the last clip that we shared with this, there's 1 billion people on the continent. And unlike the rest of them, these people are young. We're not aging out.
And talented.
Young and
Everybody
talented.
can sew. They can sew things that looks like you just bought it off a store rack in a high-end store.
It's quality stuff. We don't need them. Nobody needs them. We need to manufacture our own, period, end of story.
Advantage, using land advantage. All three factors of production favor Africa as a place or a destination for making things and then buying it back. Fourth, skill-based education. It is very important that in between the high school education, it is mostly for literacy, and the college education, which is much more understanding theoretical principles, etc. What we need is in the middle category, what is called vocational technical training. Germany, of course, is an outstanding example, but more recently, in front of our eyes, South Korea, which was a feudal system, in less than 35 years becomes an advanced economy by investing heavily in vocational technical training, in this case for manufacturing. And I think that's very important. We need to take pride in hand work, plumbing, electricity, whatever they are. And I think that's very important. Otherwise, you have this two-caste system of highly educated people who are cerebrally very strong, but they don't know anything. And then you have this agriculturally based economy. So there is this skill-based education is a very key one And by the way, that also was done in the United States, for that matter, following German example about 100 years ago.
Okay, let's pause right there because he's talking about the United States and he's talking about skills-based education, right? And he's also talking about the class system, how you have the wealthy and then you have everybody else, and there's really not much of a middle class. That is playing out in the States now. We hear it say all the time that the middle class is getting squeezed out. So let's apply what he's talking about here, the skills-based education. They used to teach us in school to work with our hands. They had wood shop, they had welding. You could learn home ec. You could learn to be an auto mechanic in school. That was part of the regular curriculum in public school. You didn't. Now you have to go to a junior college, or you have to go to a trade school. You have to go out on your own and pay money to learn these things that they used to teach in school. Dr. Umar Johnson was on the Breakfast Club, and you guys look this up. There's a clip where he's talking about the economic castration of the Black man in America. And he said in 1970, they stopped teaching us in school how to work with our hands. And he said, he made a good point in this video. He says, if you look back to the 50s and 60s, typically our elders worked in their own communities at a plant or a shop. If you were in Detroit, you probably worked at Ford or one of the motor companies. If you were other places in the Midwest, you worked at a manufacturing line or a coal mine or whatever. They taught you skill sets that you could apply right there in your community. And typically it only took the man going to work to sustain his family. When they took that out of the educational system, they stopped teaching us to work with our hands. What he's talking about right here in Africa happened in the States. The middle class is disappearing because those jobs are not, they're not teaching us to fill those jobs.
And there's a shortage now.
And there's a shortage of people to work in these industries because they're
Plumbing,
not teaching.
electricians.
And because people have to pay money to get the training to do it. So here on the continent, it is very much, especially here in Ghana, you look around and there's a lot of people with really big houses and nice communities. And then there's the lower end stuff where it's really, really poverty laden. And it's hard to find somewhere in between. There is no middle class. There has to be a skills-based educational system that teaches people how to do certain trades to sustain themselves. We're going to show you a video of a young man that we're working with up north who's doing just that all by himself, teaching women a skills-based education. And in the project that we're putting together in the Volta region, that is a part of what we're trying to pull off. We have to teach people. You got to train people to do something that will sustain them, then build on that. Maybe they can create a business around that or branch out and do other things, but there has to be some sort of education that's not just knowledge. It's got to be practical, something that can help people earn a living right now out of high school. That's not being taught here on the continent, and it's been weeded out of the education system in America, and we are seeing the effects of it today. What's going on the continent is also shaping up in America. The middle class is getting completely squeezed out. It's becoming a caste system. That's what you have over here. That's got to stop.
Export-driven economy, as I mentioned. We have to have policy reforms. Rise of China, rise of India in software, for example, was all based upon incentives given special economic zones to the IT services industries. And there are about 5, 6 of them. Each one of them have become $10 billion corporations out of nowhere in less than 25 years. If India can do it, Africa can also do it, whether it's in services or in products. So you have to have policy reforms and economic incentives for export purposes.
All right, we don't need their economic incentives or policy reforms. We're going to be bringing to you, all of you who follow this channel, an opportunity to engage in international import-export with the continent. This is critical. And we've been planning this video for some time. We were actually going to do it while we were here, but we haven't had a strong internet connection to do the interview that we're going to share with you. But we are absolutely this year going to expose each and every one of you to each and every one of you the opportunity to engage in import-export opportunities with your brothers on the continent is critical. We don't need their economic reforms. We don't need permission from them. We will position you to do that with or without those things.
And of course, as I said, most of the export markets will be not just Europe or America, but surprisingly, it will be Asia. Point number 6, Pan-African infrastructure investment. Infrastructure is needed, but really creating a Pan-African compatibility of standards for railroads, for example, or highways. North America has it, Canada, Mexico, and US. Interstate highways are very similar. Rules of engagement are the same. European Union has done a fantastic job building Eurail with compatible standards. You go from country to country seamlessly, essentially. I think Africa can do the same across nations.
Africa can do the same across nations. We don't know all the nations. We know Ghana. And we know that this is a major issue here in Ghana. The roadways are not developed, and it's not getting the kind of attention that it needs to get. And eventually, in the airports, there's an airport in Ho, in the Volta region right now that is completely finished and has been and sitting there for 3 years, and they're not using it. It's mind-boggling what's going on in the political arena. But the goal is to force their hand. And there's ways to do that. We have to have infrastructure. Without infrastructure, you can't develop anywhere. So what he's talking about here is critical. Gonna have to be strategic in pulling it off. Like I said, I don't know the rest of the countries in Africa, but I know here in Ghana, there's gonna be a strategic effort to get them to engage in this piece of it, especially the public-private partnerships.
So this includes airports, ports, Pan-African railways and highways, and this can be done through public-private partnerships. There is so much of money sitting idle on the sidelines, which is not wanting to invest in the equity markets like the stock market or into the private debt market, for example. These are sovereign funds. They think very much like the World Bank of the world. You have the whole China initiative called One Belt, One Infrastructure. Most of that is sovereign funds. They are not looking for quick returns, but long-term strategies. And therefore, to me, public-private partnership is absolutely desirable, almost inevitable. Point number 7, focus on entrepreneurship. In other words, what can Africa do, Pan-African if possible, which can unlock the African DNA? Africa has the entrepreneurial DNA, as I mentioned. It's a question of leveraging its digital infrastructure. Digital is a platform for creating more and more entrepreneurs. And today that platform is global in many ways. And therefore the African entrepreneurs using digital technology can become global enterprises. If Alibaba can do it from China, Tencent can do it from China, Flipkart can do it in India, for example, I think Africa has a huge potential to do the same thing.
All right. So this is something we started talking about after our very first visit here. We saw some vendors. People made clothing and jewelry and African masks and things of that nature who really only sell, if you walk past them and you see them, you buy their stuff. That's as big as their market is. And we were thinking, okay, there has to be a way to help some of these folks have an online presence. At the marketplace in Accra, we had a young man who sold us some masks that was telling us that Delta flies into Accra, and every so often the flight crew will come and buy up a bunch of masks and sell them in places like Germany and whatnot. And they mark them up and make a bunch of money. Cheryl's seen a lot of people online selling African stuff and charging substantially more than what these folks are charging who are producing it. We were thinking about this then, and it crossed our mind to have an African Amazon. What this dude just talked about is Alibaba. Alibaba is Chinese version of Amazon. It is going, I don't know who's, I don't think that's a task we're gonna take on, so I'm just throw it out there. One of y'all's got $1 billion waiting on you. Somebody got $1 billion waiting on you to digitize, to make digital commerce something easy on the continent. Is a $1 billion idea waiting to happen.
Leverage African diaspora. Surprisingly, the size of African diaspora outside of Africa is enormous. Not only the African Americans who were brought as slaves, or in the Caribbean Africans, but you're talking about post-independence. Post-World War II, many Africans went abroad for either jobs or for education and have settled. They're all over the world. Nigerians are as much outside Nigeria as inside Nigeria. There are actually African diaspora within Africa. Like South Africans would have people from Kenya, Kenya will have people from Ghana, etc., etc. Greater the mobility, there's a huge amount of diaspora that one can create within Africa and outside Africa. To me, that's a very key factor, leveraging the diaspora, motivating them to come back properly, invest in the country, as Taiwan did. My work in Taiwan in the 80s, for example, was about the SIPA, Scientific and Industrial Park Administration, where Taiwanese Chinese who were brilliant people, they were all scientists and engineers at IBM labs, the Xerox labs, HP labs, motivated them to come back and be high-tech entrepreneurs. And the rest is history.
And the rest is history. Look at China's economy today. So what he's saying is, it is going to take the diaspora, the African diaspora, just like the Chinese diaspora, to come home and pour in. Look where China is today. And the rest is history. They are the largest economy on the planet now, simply because they mobilize the human resources and the capital that comes with those human resources. Do y'all understand what happens on the continent if we come together the way the Chinese have come together? And look everywhere you go. The Chinese are like this. They stick together. There's a Chinatown in every major city in this country. They stay together. If we could pull that off, given all of what he's saying about the continent and the resources and the fact that that triad has to come to us, what do you think that looks like in terms of import export for the continent and the amount of money that is there to be made?
And it doesn't mean you have to move to the continent to be part of it.
You don't. But you do need to invest.
Yeah.
You need to invest some sort of human resources or capital resources and engage in the fight.
Yes.
It's going to take resources to pull it off. But this dude is not only telling you what's coming because it's going to happen, he's giving you a live example, and he worked there during this time, watching the Chinese diaspora come back and make China the biggest economy in the world in like a 25-year time frame. China does not have the resources the continent of Africa has. And we are now 1 billion people just like they are, and we're not aging out. They're aging out.
Right.
We are going to continue to be the most massive economy on this planet with the most massive resources, natural and human.
Right.
Come on now, it ain't rocket science.
No.
It is not rocket science.
If there was ever a time we need to come together as a people, no matter where you are, continent, diaspora, it doesn't matter.
This dude is
Now is the
laying
time.
out a
We have to do it.
roadmap
Yeah, we have to do it.
to take back generations of stolen wealth.
Yes.
He is laying out a roadmap and
Yes.
giving you live examples of how other people have done it,
Mhm.
and laying out a history of what's been done on the continent, and telling you that it's going to be done a different way, but it's going to be done again.
Right.
Giving us an opportunity to get in front of it. Nobody saw the Berlin conference coming. We see this coming. It's being talked about, from Jack on Twitter to professors and everybody else out there talking about how important important the continent will be in the future. It's not like it's a mystery. It's not a secret. They're telling us what's going to happen and what we need to do to engage. If we don't, we have no one to blame. No one.
And you got to think about what's more important to you. Do you want to stay in America or wherever, fighting the same fight and getting nowhere, no legacy,
And
no
ask,
generational wealth,
and asking them to take care of you, do right by you.
knowing they're not.
You're behind enemy lines.
Right. Asking them to do something
do
for
right.
you. So you continue with that versus get on the front end of what's going to be the future. Africa is the future. It started with Africa, it's going to end with Africa. That's the bottom line.
If you don't bring human resources to this, bring capital to it. Yeah. Position yourself so you can have an exit strategy down the road if you determine that that is necessary down the road. But what I'm telling you is this next 10 years on the continent of Africa is going to shape the continent of Africa and the globe. Yeah. The continent is going to shape the globe. So how the continent is shaped will shape the rest of the world. And that includes Europe and America, all of it, because everything they need is here. Yep. Everything. So we're going to continue to be on the tail end while they take everything they need and we get the scraps, or we're going to get in front of this thing and be our brother's keeper, take care of one another and get the scraps at the same, not the scraps, but the whole plate, the steak, the potatoes, the whole 9 yards.
And suck on the bone.
All of that and then some.
It is the Chinese who, I mean, the Taiwanese who really have created the Silicon Valley,
My wife ain't
Shanghai Valley, as I call it in Africa. They are the real backbone in many ways. So then can learn from other countries how to do it.
Learn from other countries.
Point number 9, invest in branding and marketing. That's very important. I think Peter Drucker, as one of the greatest thought leaders, always mentioned that there are only 2 real functions of business: innovation and marketing. Rest of them are all useless cost centers. These are the only 2 that create value. We admire innovation in every country. We praise them. We make people who innovate, invent heroes. We do not make heroes out of people who create great brands or great marketing programs. To me, a great innovation without good marketing is useless. Similarly, marketing without a proper product is useless. So it is the combination that we have to do, but the emphasis has to be more on branding and marketing, because many of these countries from Africa suffer country of origin negative bias. Africa cannot be in the business of making quality products, for example.
We stop right there. African cannot be in the business of making quality products. What does that sound like? Everything we've been saying is they tell our story. They tell our narrative. And so he said this country of origin bias, anything from Africa is subpar.
Is what they say.
What they say.
Which is a lie.
It's a bunch of nonsense.
We're here.
We're here, and I'm telling you, there's just the fruit you eat. Y'all ain't never had real fruit. I don't even like pineapple. I don't even like pineapples. We had a fresh pineapple that we picked up on our trip to Volta, brought some fruit home. My wife cut this pineapple and asked me to, I don't even like pineapple. I was like, whoa. Mangoes, watermelon with actual seeds in it, real food. It is all the natural resources, the things that come out of the ground here are so much better. I can't speak for anywhere else, but so much better than what's in the States. Don't tell me there's nothing of quality on this continent. But that's the story they tell, and what we've been saying, we gotta stop letting them tell our story. Because while they're telling that story, they're raping and pillaging. Everything they want us to believe is not of value. They want access to all of it, which is why they're telling the story they're telling. This man is telling you.
And stop listening to the story about they hate us and we hate them.
That's
it's
a bunch of nonsense too.
It's a lie.
It's a bunch of nonsense. This man is telling you what the old triad looked like and how they control the global economy was about resources and making value adds. Then he told you what's coming. He told you who the new triad would be and where those resources for their value add would come from. It's in the strategic repositioning of Africa. He didn't talk about anywhere else on the planet. Those three, what do you say, India, China, and America are going to be battling for this continent. And China is already here putting in yeoman's work, ridiculous, unprecedented amount of money they're pouring into the continent. They're already ahead of the curve.
And then they come disrespectful, but that's another topic.
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic. We have to understand, we got to tell our story. We have to start telling our story. And the lies have got to go. Branding is going to be critical.
That's a bunk. That was the same thing we thought about Japan in the 50s, South Korea in the 60s, 70s, Taiwan in the 70s, I remember that.
Made in Taiwan.
Made in China, we were laughing stock today. Nobody laughs at made in China products. They make all quality products, not just low quality products. And Indian brands have become the same way. They become world class because they meet the global standards. I think Africa can do the same, but it requires branding and marketing, not only the nation Africa, such as Brand Africa for tourism and products, but actually corporations. One of the biggest soft powers of any nation is its brands outside the country. So Made in Japan created a respect for Japan. Made in Germany created a respect for Germany. Many product categories, made in Russia is the same thing. Africa can do it also. And the last and the most important element is democratization of wealth, not income. I think economists have argued for income equalization or income imparity, the Gini index. I think there has to be a Gini index on the wealth side, because wealth perpetuates over time through succession planning, investment. How can we make sure that the wealth is created and distributed across all socioeconomic classes? This can happen with the rise of modern middle class, who can not only generate income, but also save. Savings is invested properly, and all of that creates additional wealth. In other words, it is not the income statements, as we call it in accounting, but also the balance sheet.
Hold on. Balance sheet. So you can raise somebody's income, but until they get to a place where money's working for them and they're not working for money, there's not wealth. You will never be wealthy as long as your survival is dependent upon you working for money and you don't have money working for you. So what this dude is talking about is democratization of wealth, which is a term we didn't even know what that was, but we're doing it. He's talking about giving people a wage, helping them to earn enough money where they can actually save some money and then actually put that money to work. You may not be financially independent where you don't ever have to work again, but I promise you, you don't even have a hope of being financially independent if you don't have enough money to save and invest and grow. You gotta have money working for you. He calls it the democratization of wealth. Should I break down the farm project? Okay. I'm almost getting ahead of myself. I want to tell y'all some stuff my wife just told me I can't, but these are the things. Yeah, this video is long. These are the things that we're already putting in play right here on the continent. We have to it's got to be about the people. It has to be about the people. It has to be about positioning them to democratize the wealth. And you can't do that in a caste system. These people at the bottom don't have, it's hand to mouth. Even if they have crops to farm, they're only farming them just enough to feed themselves. They're not making any profit off of it. And that has to stop. And I think as long as we focus on that, we can lift. As I said, a rising tide lifts all ships. We can lift a whole bunch of people and do well for ourselves in the process.
And therefore, balance sheet per household is the real objective, both by policy and by market process. So let me conclude. Rise of Africa is inevitable.
Inevitable.
And has the potential to become the growth engine for the world.
The world.
Including for China, India, and America. To overcome the challenges, Africa needs to go digital, do value add in Africa on raw materials, invest in skill-based education, focus on entrepreneurship and innovation, leverage its diaspora, and pivot toward Asia.
Scrap that one.
I hope this.
There's not a whole lot else that needs to be said. If you don't understand why we're here in Ghana right now, got me excited. I'm tapping on the table. My wife don't like that. If you don't understand why we're here in Ghana, you don't understand the focus on the continent. You don't necessarily have to buy in, but you need to understand what is going on and why it's going on. Because when you look back, you're not going to have anybody to blame. I refuse to let anybody in my sphere of influence walk around ignorant to how important this continent will be to the entire globe, which is why we asked you at the beginning of this video to do something we've never asked. I need you to share this with every person with melanin in their skin that you know. And they need to share with every person that has melanin in their skin. If you want to fight in the States and stay there, do that, but diversify, please, for your own sake, diversify. It is not all about the United States. And that country will not always be in the position it's in. History has proven that.
Exactly.
With every world hegemon ever, that time has come to an end. When that happens in the States and you haven't gotten your reparations, how bad you're gonna feel if you miss this boat. So don't miss the boat. If nothing else, diversify. Spread it out a little bit. Give yourself options. And that's all I have to say. This is critical, folks. Critical. Share this video. This thing needs to go viral. You got other people out here telling us what we need to know.
It's going to happen.
With or without you. With or without you.
With or without you, it's going to happen.
And everybody who don't look like you know. Indians know. China's all over the place. The Lebanese are all over the place. Jack from Twitter. Everybody knows but us. And we want to fight and resist and buck change.
Yeah.
Man, look, it started here, as my wife said, it will end on this continent.
And let me just say this, because I see a lot of chatter on social media about, you know, they sold us and now they want us to spend our money there and they're tricking us and all this stuff. That thought process is so, try not to offend people.
Yeah, I'm staying out of that because I can't. I'm gonna make
It's
somebody
so
mad.
low level. Let me put it that way. It's so low level that I don't even know how to address it properly, because if that's where your thinking is, I don't even know if you can get to the place where you can invest in your future, invest for your family, and build generational wealth, because you're stuck. Your mindset is stuck.
You can't heal thinking like that. You are stuck in the past and you are carrying that with you daily. Whether you know it or not, it's affecting your life.
Not only
right
that,
now.
You're acting like for 400 years, Africa been living it up and, you know, left us hanging. No, they were colonized and taken advantage of and exploited.
But
they
people,
weren't in a position to do anything.
Baby, people who are thinking like that, they ain't thinking about continental Africa, period. It doesn't matter. Yeah. What you're worried about is you, and you're caught in the hurt of the past to the point where it's blinding you to the future. Right. That is just backwards thinking, and it serves your colonizers, which is exactly what they want.
Because at least the continent, they made attempts to apologize and try to make amends and bring.
America ain't done none of that. We just saw an article where the Dutch, matter of fact, the Dutch president sitting with the president of Ghana officially apologized to the nation of Ghana for their role in the slave trade. Have we ever even gotten that in the States?
They don't even want to admit it happened. They keep trying to change the history, rewrite history. Come on now.
Get over it. Yeah. You first of all, forget everything else. For yourself, you can't heal if you don't allow yourself to move on from things that happened hundreds of years ago. But for those of you who are believers, I'm gonna share it with you like this. You have the opportunity to be Joseph. Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers, literally, not other tribes, his own brothers. He rose to power because he allowed himself to heal, and he was there to take care of his brothers in the end.
And that's a scripture that says what the devil meant for evil,
God meant for good. Yeah. God meant it. God knew it was going to happen. It wasn't no mistake, wasn't no accident. Didn't catch the Lord by surprise. He knew what the end of the story was. And if you could see the end of the story and stop looking in the rearview mirror, I promise you, you'd be invested in the continent.
Right. And it's not to say to forget your history, because it happened.
We talked about it.
We deserve reparations.
You ain't gonna get it though.
Absolutely.
They're not gonna give it to you. So why focus on what's gone on over here for the last 400 years and be mad about something when the place where you at right now won't value you enough to even apologize?
Right.
And they're definitely not giving you even your 40 acres and a mule. Forget about it. It's not coming.
Yeah.
So get over it and move forward. Being stuck in the past will prevent you from reaching your future. And I'm not telling you, I'm just sharing with you everybody else who doesn't look like us that is telling you what is going to happen on this continent. It's not up for debate. It's not a discussion. It is a fact that it will take place. And the question is, what role are we going to play? Are we going to be in the position where they snatch up all the resources once again and leave us destitute like they've always done? Or are we going to step up and do something about it? They're going to come no matter what. But if they got to come by from us, guess what happens in the process? Somebody's going to do well. When the continent is the center, for the focal point of the planet, somebody's going to do extremely well. Why shouldn't that be us? Why shouldn't that be me and you? Why shouldn't we be Joseph taking care of our brothers and we all come together and leave up out of Egypt? In prosperity, in numbers, and resources, because they left with everything. I'm telling you, that will play out. Whether we choose to be a part is on us. Share the video. If you want to stay and you want to fight, wherever you are in the diaspora, stay and fight, but give yourself some options. Diversify, give yourself an exit strategy should you change your mind later. Because this is not a question of if, it is a matter of when. And I'm telling you now, this next decade, 2020 to 2030 will be critical in the future of this continent, which will be critical in the future of this planet. End of story. So with that, we apologize. I know this one was much longer than normal, but the information is so important that we need to make sure you have it, and we need to make sure we walked you through it, make sure you understood everything this man is talking about. We can't have everybody else know while we sit in the dark. This dude said Africa's a giant that needs to wake up. That means me and you and people who look like us. We need to wake up. And if that giant's gonna wake up, I don't want to be the one left sleeping. I want to wake up too, and I want to partake in what's gonna happen with this awakening that is taking place. And I promise you, it is taking place. It's already taking place.
If you haven't noticed, you've been asleep.
And that's sad, because that's not unnatural for us. That's not uncommon for us to sleep through things that are right in front of us because we don't pay attention to the signs that are so clear, which is ideally what they wanted. Why do you think they didn't educate us? They don't want us thinking about things like this. They don't want us to be critical thinkers. The education system is what it is today because they absolutely don't want competition. They want workers. We have to start seeing beyond what's right here, right in front of our face. We got to be able to look out into the future and say, okay, there's some things coming that I need to be proactive in preparing for, so I'm not reactive when it's over. Wondering, how do I get a little piece of that? When you could have had a major chunk.
And you can't have a microwave mindset either, because one of the things he touched on is, China's coming in. They're not looking for a fast return. They're thinking long term.
He says it's going to take a matter of decades for this beast, this giant of Africa, to become what it should be. A matter of decades. What does that mean? It's 1 million opportunities. In the next 20, 30 years, 1 million different opportunities to be part of. Create our legacy.
Our legacy.
They stripped us of that. We have an opportunity to engage, and what better place to engage than where they took us from, and create a legacy for those who remained here and for those of us who are not here. We still family. Create a legacy.
For your children.
Anyway, I'm gonna stop because I can go on this for days, literally for days. Guys, have a great day. Chew on this information, and please, 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 if you don't share any other video we ever do, share this one. Make this go viral.